It's now time to slide on over to Business World Business Class. To moderate this segment here is a young and a beautiful lady by the name of Miss Shweta Ramesh. Who is her guest of honor today? I won't let the cat out of the bag, but I'll tell you what, he is good looking. Let's meet them.
Hi, I'm Shweta Ramesh, hostess of Business World Business Class, where I interview entrepreneurs around the world. I have with me here today Mr. Rehan Daur, founder and CEO of ValueBridge International and Ethica Global Alliance, a nonprofit company. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. So how did you come to the United States? What was your journey like?
Well, I had no choice, but my parents came here to pursue their PhD, so it wasn't a matter of choice.
Okay.
And I was a little boy in elementary school.
So you came from a very educated background then. How has that really influenced the ways in which you grew up and the ways that you view business today?
Well, it's interesting. We arrived and ended up moving to a very small town in Harrisonburg, Virginia, down in the southern Massanutten Mountain area. Back in the early 70s, the whole town was a maximum of 6,000 people.
Oh,
so
wow.
very small town.
Yes, very small.
And of course, my English wasn't as strong, obviously, and there was no ESL at that time, right? And so we arrived in the April timeframe, or actually May timeframe. School had just finished or about to finish, and I realized that I wasn't going to be able to communicate with a lot of these people. So I decided I was going to learn English and speak like the Southern boys within a 6-month period, if not less. And my teachers, my ESL teachers were John Wayne and Happy Days and 8 is Enough. TV was my ESL teacher. So in 6 months I learned. And I had a huge cultural impact as a result of growing up down south. So I think a lot of things that I do today has a lot to do with where I grew up. How I actually overcame a lot of challenges, speaking of language and many other things.
Yeah. So when you were trying to overcome these language barriers, what were some of the specific obstacles that you faced?
In terms of language barriers?
In terms of experiences that you may have had that contributed to the way that you uniquely view business and your own unique perspective that you have today.
Sure. So having to learn English on my own through TV, being the only colored boy in the entire town of Harrisonburg.
Wow.
People just didn't know anything at that time down in that area. So I had to come up with very unique and conventional ways of being able to understand and also adapt to learning baseball very quickly at an early age, getting on the baseball team, learning to play basketball, learning martial arts so I just wouldn't get my butt kicked as much as I used to being a very skinny little Indian boy.
Real life karate kid.
Real life karate kid, absolutely. By age 16, I had a black belt.
Wow.
And I was competing on national level. So I think one of the key things this is my teenage up to high school level years, I had learned enough how to adapt, how to be innovative, and not let the opinions of others and other things impact me as much, although emotions play a role as a teenager. However, so in my later years, I guess, I drew from that resiliency and the ability to adapt in unconventional ways.
That sounds, very much like entrepreneurship. That resiliency, that ability to take what could be an obstacle or a challenge and really turn it around and make it work for you. Is that why you wanted to become an entrepreneur, or were there other kinds of influences?
No, I actually I probably couldn't even spell the word entrepreneur at that time. I didn't even know what entrepreneur was, coming from the fact that my mother was a teacher and father was in research work. So for me, business was not on top of my mind at all. Although I wanted to be an engineer, I wanted to actually be a behavioral psychologist. And largely because I wanted to know why people do what they do, like beat me up when I was a little kid. Joking, but I actually started my career in the banking world.
Okay.
And went to investment banking. Into the corporate banking world, and at the same time my interest began to expand in understanding business through that process, of course. So the biggest thing that happened, I think, is that I hated doing analysis work when I was in my early stages of my career, which led me to begin thinking about how do I really leverage my finance degree, my marketing degree, international business management degree that I had attained, and to be able to do something that I enjoyed. So what I learned was I was a people person. I was strong in communication. I actually enjoyed being in sales, so I decided sales and marketing. So
okay, so that's a different kind of pathway from investment banking. So
yes. So what I realized is what I enjoyed more was being able to identify unique ways of creating value. And I discovered that while I was an analyst at the bank in my first 2 years of career after college, that I was finding different ways of solving various lending challenges for commercial lending operations in my first 2 years. So when I determined that I wanted to actually do something that didn't have a ceiling in terms of income, at the same time, it allowed me to be creative and allowed me to engage with people and identify solutions. That's when I began to get more involved in working for firms like Morgan Stanley, where I went onto the sales side of the organization and grew really fast. By age 31, I was a senior vice president at the firm. And right about that time, which is around 2002, I had a desire to really do something that was outside of the corporate world.
Okay, so what were some of those factors, that prompted you? You had this great stable job at Morgan Stanley. What were some of the factors that prompted you to kind of take that leap of faith in yourself and in the world and really say, okay, I'm going to do this thing on my own?
Yeah, great question. So my biggest thing is creativity. So for me, feeling almost bored in 2002, which was right after the crash of the market. And I was actually during 2000, 2 years before, helping do some things in international markets and identifying opportunities for Morgan Stanley.
Turn of the century kind of things with new technologies and everything.
Precisely, and yes, technology was one of the major areas I was focused on as well. So for me, out of boredom, and I realized that I like challenges. So happens to be one of those perfect storms. A French billionaire happened to identify me and met with me through a common friend who had an idea, who wanted to expand on it. He had just gotten his PhD from MIT and he had never built a business, came from a very well financially heeled family. And he was looking for a profile like myself. So he hired me out of Morgan Stanley to actually build a company in the financial services side with real estate and things. And that was my first crack at, if you will, at entrepreneurship at age 34.
Wow. That seems like a very, unlikely, unique story. Where did you meet this French billionaire?
Well, I did meet him out of nowhere. It was an introduction done through someone in Wall Street who really had high opinions of me. I had worked with him. We had a great relationship. Who knew him, and when he learned that this gentleman was looking for someone of that kind of profile, he thought of me, and we met. 4 or 5 months we talked, and before you know it, I was resigning from Morgan Stanley and taking on a brand new risk of a startup.
Wow, that's great. That's good. You see hard work as well as just being in the right place at the right time kind of combine together and come together to create this wonderful opportunity for you.
Right. My answers to my boredom were answered, if you will.
That's good. Yeah. So when you were thinking of entrepreneurship and you first going into that world of business, really, what were some of the core ideas that you were holding about why you wanted to go into business? What were some of the things that you were saying, okay, I'm going into business in order to impact this area?
So to be very frank, I went into business largely because I wanted to be able to earn some money that I wanted to make, and I went into the investment banking world. But frankly, when my turn occurred towards the entrepreneurship side, it was for a different reason.
Okay.
It was an opportunity to actually create first of its kind a financial services company, a real estate company that would actually put the consumer's interest first.
Wow.
And Freddie Mac became very interested in our product model and decided that this was 30 years ago they've ever seen, or 30 years they haven't seen a unique product of this kind before. So we had some really interesting investors to make a product that was actually consumer friendly. And that
Okay.
became one of my major interests because I wanted to be socially conscious. So my journey actually began in the entrepreneurship world from a social consciousness or social entrepreneurship, which people didn't know what that meant in 2002.
Yeah.
I was one of the few people, I guess, saying I'm a social entrepreneur, if you will.
Okay. So what would be your personal definition of social consciousness? You know, it's a very broad phrase. How would you personally define that within the context of your company and how other people can tap into this social consciousness?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you probably need an hour for me to really answer it properly. But frankly speaking, social consciousness is social conscious entrepreneurship is something new that I have been writing about, and most people know social entrepreneurship. But the consciousness I'm bringing to the table, because if you think about whatever it is that the human being does, it does it based on his consciousness about what it's doing.
Yes.
And if we begin to understand that how the human world truly is connected, there are no divisions. When I get on a plane, I always look down after 30,000 feet of being up in the air to look for boundaries. I find no boundaries on Earth ever.
Everything looks the same.
Exactly.
Yeah, everybody's just
So
ants on the
where
ground.
are the boundaries? They exist in our minds and they exist on paper. But when you come down to the human level, the ability to really create value for human to human on a global basis is really the same. So the consciousness that says we can actually create value for human to human if we remove all these things that are in our mind, preconceived notions of differences that exist, I think we can find many solutions. And that was my real motivation, which got me to begin thinking about how do we really look at bottlenecks that exist today, whether it's in education, healthcare, agriculture, or in the areas of, well, right now we're focused a lot on alternative energy.
Yeah, that's a big field, definitely
absolutely,
hot market.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So on a consciousness, my ultimate objective through the nonprofit is really what we do is we hold thought leadership conferences and roundtables where we raise the consciousness of policymakers, NGO heads and CEOs and others to begin thinking about how their policies or how their methods of doing what they're doing is actually impacting the end user, the human life.
Okay.
And every human being on the face of earth is seeking one thing, happiness.
Yes.
And how do we really create that in an integrative way as opposed to in a parasitic way where we create a product and we destroy many things in the process. So my mission really is to be able to do those things that actually create ripple effect value. For every dollar we create for our bottom line should create $5 of value in the society from which it made a dollar for itself. That's the ultimate model that on the consciousness level that we have.
That's fantastic. You know, that sounds like a business model or a strategy that everybody should follow. If you could tell like one thing for aspiring entrepreneurs who want to adopt this type of social consciousness strategy for their businesses, what would be your advice to give them? So if you could tell the viewers, you know, what would be something that they could take away from this idea and directly implement in their businesses?
Well, that's a great question. So in a very short, quick synopsis, if whenever the entrepreneur you're thinking about creating an impact, always think about the end user and how easy can you make it for them to actually attain it, enjoy it, sustain it, and be feeling good about it, and they want to tell everybody else about it. So at the end of the day, if you're solving that problem, money will just come to you. Create the right culture, integrity, ethics, and be able to have transparency no matter what. Internally, within your people, with your investors, shareholders, and consumers and partners, the integrity has to be at the center of everything that you actually do.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It was wonderful to hear about social consciousness and your entrepreneurial journey. So.
It was great to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Tune in same time next month, same channel. Have a good afternoon.